treason-wearing bells. From then on, jesters played it safe. Their routines were limited to juggling fruit and pretending to fall down. The golden age of medieval wit died that night, silenced by one man's ill-timed roast. And so, thanks to Roland Le Fool, the English court discovered the first rule of comedy: never punch up when up can have you executed. In medieval Europe, the legal system was less about evidence and more about endurance. If two people disagreed, the simplest solution was obvious: hand them weapons and let God decide. This was trial by combat, justice, but with more blood loss. The idea was straightforward. Two opponents would meet in an open field, each claiming divine backing. The logic was that God would never allow an innocent man to die. In practice, he seemed remarkably indecisive. Enter Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legris, two French nobles in 1386, who managed to turn a lawsuit into France's last officially sanctioned duel. Carouge accused Legris of a crime so severe it required heavenly arbitration: the assault of his wife Marguerite. Legris denied it. The court stalled. And somewhere between bureaucracy and bloodlust, the king decided, let's just fight about it. The duel was held before the entire Parisian court: priests, nobles, and one very nervous queen. The combatants rode in, wearing enough armour to sink a boat. Trumpets sounded, prayers were mumbled, and then they began what chroniclers politely called a ferocious engagement, which is medieval for a mutual attempt at dismemberment. Legris was faster, stronger, and allegedly better at not dying. But fate, or physics, favoured Carouge's. After several rounds of smashing each other with divine enthusiasm, Carouge's managed to knock his opponent to the ground and stab him through the throat. The crowd erupted. Marguerite wept. The church pretended this was all part of the plan. The problem? A few years later, the king realised that maybe basing justice on swordsmanship wasn't the most reliable system. God, it turned out, might not actually moonlight as a referee. So he quietly banned trial by combat, replacing it with the far less exciting investigation. Carouge's was hailed as a hero for about a month before everyone remembered that two men had killed each other to solve what could have been handled by paperwork. Legris was buried, the church sighed, and humanity collectively learned, briefly, that violence and truth don't mix well. Trial by combat was over. Lawyers, unfortunately, were just beginning. Before plumbing, soap and common sense, public bathhouses were the pride of medieval cities. They were warm, social, and most importantly, didn't smell like everything else in Europe. Families, travellers, and merchants all gathered in steaming wooden tubs to wash away sin, dirt, and the plague, in that order. For a while, everything was perfectly innocent. Men and women bathed together, separated only by a polite nod to modesty and a few strategically placed buckets. It was wholesome, peaceful, almost hygienic. Then came Lord Alaric of Burgundy, a man so spectacularly bad at behaving that he single-handedly turned cleanliness into a moral crisis. Alaric was rich, bored, and deeply committed to being terrible in public. One summer evening, he attended the local bathhouse and brought company. Not his wife, not even someone's wife, several someone's wives. Contemporary accounts say he arrived perfumed, laughing, and underdressed for penance. Within an hour, the bathhouse had transformed from a public utility into the kind of scene that would have made even Dionysus blush. Unfortunately for Alaric, the local bishop's servant was also there, probably just trying to take a normal bath like a normal person, and ran out screaming. The church launched an investigation, which was medieval code for "we already know who did it." The fallout was biblical. Sermons condemned the unholy mingling of flesh and filth. Alaric was fined, excommunicated, and forced to build a chapel as penance. And as for everyone else, mixed bathing was banned across the region. Overnight, bathhouses emptied. Men and women were ordered to bathe separately. Or better yet, not at all. The moral panic spread faster than fleas. Soon, cities across Europe followed suit. Priests claimed water opened the pores of the soul, making it easier for temptation to sneak in. By the 15th century, bathing itself was viewed with suspicion. Cleanliness, ironically, became dirty. And so, because one noble couldn't control himself in warm water, an entire continent decided to live in filth for centuries. The smell of the Middle Ages wasn't destiny, it was bureaucracy. Thanks to Lord Alaric, the phrase sinful indulgence forever included the act of basic hygiene. In the Middle Ages, bread wasn't just food, it was survival, currency, and occasionally a projectile. For the average peasant, it was the one thing standing between them and a dirt-based diet. But whenever humans rely on something, another human inevitably finds a way to ruin it. Enter Thomas the baker, a man whose business sense was as stale as his bread. London, 1327. Times were hard, flour was expensive, and Thomas had an idea so bad it could only end in legislation. He began padding his loaves with rocks, not pebbles, not gravel, rocks, small enough to hide in the crust, heavy enough to fool a scale, and cheap enough to make a profit. The result? Customers were literally breaking teeth. One unfortunate merchant cracked a molar so loudly that the town bailiff heard it from across the market square. Word spread faster than plague gossip. Thomas was dragged before the city officials, who examined the evidence, a loaf so heavy it could double as a weapon. Now, medieval courts weren't known for subtlety. The solution to fraud was usually hanging, mutilation, or public humiliation. But since Thomas's crime involved bread, they decided to get creative. He was tied to a post, forced to wear a fake loaf on his head, and pelted with his own inventory. It was justice, but with carbs. Afterward, the council passed a new law to prevent future culinary treason. Bakers would now be required to add one extra loaf to every dozen sold, a safeguard against shortchanging, or in this case dental assault. Thus was born the baker's dozen. Ironically, this act of greed gave birth to one of the most generous traditions in commerce. Every honest baker in London now had to give away free bread, all because Thomas couldn't resist turning lunch into shrapnel. He faded into obscurity, though his legend lived on. The man who made honesty mandatory by being spectacularly dishonest. And somewhere in a medieval tavern, a toothless peasant probably raised a mug and muttered, "At least we got more bread out of it." So next time you buy a dozen donuts and get 13, thank a medieval fraudster with rocks for morals, and even worse for baking skills. If you think church music is boring now, imagine it before anyone discovered melody. For most of the Middle Ages, hymns were basically holy mumbling, slow, monotone chants designed less to inspire and more to make you forget you were alive. The church liked it that way, predictable, orderly, emotionally bankrupt. Then came Brother Antonius, a monk in 13th century Burgundy with too much imagination and too little supervision. Antonius had grown tired of the same Gregorian drones echoing through the stone halls. So, one night, while everyone else was reciting their